Hey guys, thanks for coming out. There's happy hours, I know, and parties starting, so I appreciate you guys coming out for the last session on Thursday. I'm Drew Murray. I'm a game director at Insomniac Games. I recently shipped Sunset Overdrive. Marcus Smith, who was supposed to be doing this with me, he was the creative director. He bailed. But that's my first pro tip for you is do a talk with someone else, have them bail, and say you'll forgive them if they do the entire PowerPoint presentation. It makes presenting a lot easier. So Marcus and I were about halfway through the production of Resistance 3 when Marcus, that's him, he was the creative director on Resistance 3. I was the lead designer. We basically won the game design lottery. Ted Price, Insomniac's CEO, came to us and said, for our next game, we're going to do whatever you guys want. If you guys want to do rabbits in space, we'll do rabbits in space. That's the game design dream, right? That's when you're starting school or you get your first job, people say, that's never, ever going to happen to you. Like, don't just give up the idea that that's ever going to happen. But it's actually happening to us. And we were, as you would expect, we were ecstatic about this. We didn't really have any constraints put on us. The main one was that we couldn't do an open world game, so we pitched and made Insomniac's first open world. And we were really empowered to come up and create with whatever we wanted to do. And for the first couple months, it was awesome. Marcus and I would get together, and we would brainstorm like school kids. Well, I like open world games and Centaurs and Raymond Pettibone and La Tigra. And he'd say, oh, that's cool. I like pinball machines and Tank Girl and badminton and sunset walks with my soulmate. And we'd be like, awesome, let's make that. And I mentioned my fascination with like vintage Halloween masks and Jeff Koons. And we carried gleefully on like that for a few months, combined all these loves and interests into this massive, bloated PowerPoint with no real connection or method to its madness, and presented that to the owners of Insomniac Games. And the best thing I can say about it is that they were more dumbfounded, I think, than aghast, and Ted didn't actually fire us. They gave us a few weeks, and we came back with a little bit more semblance of a game. But today I'm going to talk about that process of how Marcus and I went from this sort of mess of a PowerPoint presentation to what I think is a really fun game and a game that I'm really proud of. So the job of a director is, as you might guess, is to direct. And to our mind, that encompasses three core aspects: inspiration, communication, and conviction. And these are kind of what I'm going to be using to frame what I'm talking about as I go through the tools that we used on Sunset Overdrive. Inspiration is something that's relevant to both you and the team. For you, you've got to be into this idea that you're going to spend the next 3 to 4 years of the cluster cuss that is game development. And then the team obviously also has to be excited. They're also there in that 3 to 4 year process. But I think it's really helpful as well if you can give people something that they're able to still fit some of themselves in and be inspired and put a lot of themselves into. If you're an introvert, and I am, communication is what it will seem like you do all day, every day. And it's the hardest part of the job. There's the day-to-day of just making sure everyone is talking to each other and knows what to do. But the hard part was, as I said, taking this kind of crazy PowerPoint and a couple years of Marcus's and I conversation and putting that into a cohesive package that in a few minutes we could explain what we were trying to do to the owners of the company, to the team, and then ultimately when we were pitching it to publishers. And then last is conviction. You have to be the rock that really believes in the game. You have to be championing the game. And even if things aren't going well and everybody knows it and you know it and the game's awful and it's broken and it's no fun, I think you still have to be the person who believes in the process. That's like, yeah, we've done this before. It's always kind of shitty at some point. And if we just keep walking through the swamp, eventually we're gonna hit dry land. Because if you start feeling like, oh my God, the process might not work, everyone picks up on it and everything starts to fall apart. And so we can get to the substance of production. I'm going to give the most brief description that I can of the first 2 years that Marcus and I were talking about and working on Sunset Overdrive before we actually started making it. And it basically came down to a lunch conversation that Marcus and I had. If you could make any game, what would you want to make? And we came up with a spinoff of I Am Legend, the book more than the movie. But we were interested in this idea of this mechanic of the player being able to go out into a post-apocalyptic world that's relatively safe, that they could go out and explore and scavenge and gather things and prepare. But then at night, all the monsters would come out. They'd have to hunker down in their home and use all those supplies that they had during the day and be under siege. And at first, it was deadly serious. It was very much we would have been going towards the Insomniac version of DayZ if we had continued down that path. Fortunately, someone sent around the Gorillaz video for On Melancholy Hill around that time saying, man, it would be really cool to play a game that looks like this. And the next time we got together, we were like, it'd be really fun to make a game that looks like this. And I think that recentered us in a very significant way. Marcus and I and a lot of Insomniacs came to Insomniac because we love the Spyro and Ratchet games that are a lot about fun and stylization and humor. And this idea of shifting Sunset away from this dark, gray-toned zombie apocalypse, this very colorful, fun-focused game that didn't take itself too seriously, excited us a lot more and gave us a lot of freedom. And that freedom led us down some great roads and up some more difficult ones. We really were inspired to start talking about all these things that we loved and found interesting. We had some mechanical ideas for the game, but what was really exciting to us was to be talking about a particular feeling or mood for the game. And to that end, we weren't talking a lot about video games. We were having conversations about the meanings of fashion and freedom and consumerism. And we were looking at art and talking about like the good and bad points of different animes and British comedies. And we were making mixed CDs and with liner notes and telling each other why we thought that this song embodied the spirit of Sunset Overdrive. And it was really fun. And we were very, very slowly honing in on what we wanted Sunset Overdrive to be. And then once we had that rough concept, we just needed to convince everyone else that this was a good idea to make. And unfortunately for us and anyone who had to sit through the early presentations, we were not very good at distilling all those hours of conversations into sound bites. And in fact, at the beginning, we didn't even try to distill them, hence the bloated PowerPoint in which we dumped everything we liked in the lap of Insomniac's owners. And the problem which we hadn't really considered but became the bane of our existence for the next year or year and a half is that by changing to something kind of different, it went from being really easy to describe the game to really difficult. When we were talking about making the I Am Legend Sunset Overdrive, it's really easy to be and say, it's kind of like The Walking Dead, except at night it'll be sort of like Dungeon Defenders, or it's going to look like Fallout or Resistance. And people really like to default to A plus B statements. They're easy to understand. I think that most games and probably most creative projects are pitched that way. It's like The Matrix, but The Matrix meets 50 Shades of Grey. Or more likely, it's going to have the sales of Call of Duty, the subscription fees of World of Warcraft, and the microtransactions of League of Legends. It's going to be great. And so what we tried to do was we had all these things, and so we tried to create an A plus B plus C plus D plus E statement that would encompass the main point. So imagine the scavenging of Fallout with the under siege feeling of Nazi zombies, but starring the Gorillaz in a hyperactive version of an American city like Tekken Concrete was to Tokyo, with a humor of Repo Man. And you can probably imagine that didn't go over real well. And I know the game, and I look at that, and I'm not exactly sure what that would mean. But we just continued forward with that, and we kept trying to get more and more specific. So we just kind of continued adding to the problem. We added an F, and then a G, and then an H. And then around the time we got to pre-production, we had a team of around 20 to 22 people roll on. They were still pretty confused by what we were talking about doing, and I think the team had trust in me and Marcus. We'd been working with most of these people for quite a while. I think that they trusted our passion for the concept, but I don't think there's a lot of faith in the concept itself at that time. And Marcus and I mean, our job is describing the box in which everyone is supposed to be working. And instead, we basically had this giant Katamari ball with all these disparate parts that were glommed on. And we could talk about the specific parts. We could say, well, that pink tree, that represents this idea. But it was really difficult to explain how those things mesh together. And so we started trying to come up with some different strategies to get people both on board with what we wanted to do and also helping us figure out what exactly it was we wanted to do. So one of the first things we did was we started having movie nights. Marcus and I are very similar people. We're the exact same age. We both grew up with dads who owned construction businesses and spent our summers doing construction. We both were punk rock kids. We both went to art school. And so whenever I say, yeah, do you remember that particular episode from Facts of Life and remember how they did that? He's like, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. But whenever we were working with our team, a lot of different ages, a lot more diversity. And so when we would make a reference to something like The Warriors, the movie, the gangsploitation movie, a lot of them didn't have any idea of what we were talking about. And so we started this idea of a movie night to try to create a shared vernacular. And these were mostly based on creating a tone for Sunset Overdrive. I think that movies and videos, you can, a lot of times even in just like a 2 or 3 or 5 minute clip, explain a tone to someone. At most, you're talking an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's a lot shorter than doing something like playing a game. And one of the first ones we watched was The Warriors. And we found that it really helped a lot. In fact, it was kind of useless to have these if we couldn't explain beforehand, this is the reason that we are watching this movie. And so with The Warriors, we said, we're going to have all these different survivor groups in the city. We're going to watch this show, and these gangs are like insanely wacky and really specialized, and they're very exaggerated, but they all take themselves very seriously. They're silly, but they take themselves very seriously. And so it was easy for us to say, that's the kind of feeling that we want for our survivor groups. And that clicked in, people got it, we got through the movie. It's like, okay, that's what we needed to be focusing on. Idiocracy was the same way, really good satire of pop culture and consumerism. It helped sell, I think, a lot of the team on the idea of having humor in the game. And then we watched other movies that didn't go over so well. And I think part of that was, I think certain movies it was hard for us to tease out. Who's seen Turk 182? Probably not a single person. One person, all right. Turk 182, it's about this guy who is fighting in this very outrageous public manner, fighting against New York City Hall. It's kind of a slow burn of a movie. And frankly, it's got kind of crappy production quality now that you go back and revisit it. And I think that even though there's a little bit of something that we were trying to tease out of there, frankly, most of the team was just laughing at the movie. More than taking it seriously. And then my biggest personal disappointment was we watched a couple episodes of The Young Ones, an old BBC comedy that they rebroadcast on MTV in the 80s. And it had very typically dry humor. It had really outrageous physical comedy and violence. Every week, segued into there would be a random rock band playing in some random location, like it might be Motorhead is playing in one of the characters' bedrooms, and there's no explanation for it. It just happens, and it has like a through plot line, but it segues in and out of absurdity and nonsense. And to us, this is like, this is great. This is what we want Sunset Overdrive to be. But then we had the team watch it, and at the end of it, Lisa Brown, one of our designers, raised her hand, and she's like, "Why did you make us watch that?" And this is one of the times that I really screwed up. I said that I felt like the team at the time had trust in me and Marcus and trusted our passion, but didn't fully trust in the concept. And I think I felt like we were on this really thin crust on top of lava, and that if I had said, "Yeah, this is it. We've got all this money, and Microsoft is going to publish a game that's like a version of The Young Ones," that people were just going to freak out, and people were going to lose whatever faith they actually did have in us. So I mumbled something about humor and rapid pacing and kind of left it at that, because at the time I didn't feel confident enough to say that. But it's an interesting counterpoint with Scott Pilgrim, which we watched a few weeks later. And I think if you take the veneer away, they're very similar movies. They have a lot of absurdity. They're breaking the fourth wall. There's a lot of humor. Music plays a big part in the feel of the movie. But a lot of it is just a lot more timely. The stylization, the music, the humor, they feel more contemporary. And I think for our team, who was a lot of late 20s to mid 30s, it just made a lot more sense than the young ones. And people were like, oh yeah, we should totally make a game like Scott Pilgrim. Thank God we're not making a game like that Young Ones show. And so what we learned with the movie nights is really this idea of if we had a talking point that we could tell people this is what you're looking at, and we could give them something that they could relate to, they tended to go over really well and sell or help people grasp what we were doing with the tone really well. So at the same time, we were trying to break the team out of some of their preconceived notions and normal way of thinking and designing games. And so we started doing these song missions. And I remembered this interview with Perry Farrell when he was starting Jane's Addiction. He talked about working with Dave Navarro a lot and trying to sort of unteach him how to play guitar and keep his technical skills, obviously, but putting him into a different headspace of how rock and roll was supposed to sound. And we want to do the same with our pre-production team. So we started thinking of different exercises to do, and one of the ones that we did was we started having these song missions. And every week, we would assign a song to every member of the pre-production team. And then a week later, we asked them to pitch a mission based on either the lyrics of the song or how that particular song made them feel. And we did things like Tricky and LCD Sound System and Wu-Tang and the Velvet Underground and a bunch of other different things. And then at the end of the week, we'd gather everyone into a room. We'd listen to everyone's pitches. Things like physical comedy and horrible voice acting and weird props and visual aids were highly encouraged. And none of these initial missions ended up in the game, but I think that they were really useful for several reasons. I think, for one thing, they're really good at getting the team inspired. It got them approaching problems in a very different way. They weren't thinking, oh, well, what are we going to do? This is a game, and I know how to design a level. It was asking them to spring their ideas from a different place. It's also a place for non-designers to be pitching ideas and participating in this early process. Programmers, animators, everyone we had on the pre-production team was a part of this process. I think maybe one of the most valuable things was it was a place where outrageousness and humor were really encouraged. There's always a lot of laughter. We gave a crappy vintage blacklight poster each week as a prize for the best pitch. And I think it created a really safe place for people to pitch ideas and be absurd and put out ideas that they might not normally be comfortable pitching. I'll just say this, in my previous 6 years at Insomniac, I never heard a mission pitched that related to dating or girlfriends. And I would guess that 20 to 25% of the missions that got pitched during this process either had to do with getting a girlfriend, keeping a girlfriend, or dealing with an ex-girlfriend. And then lastly, it helped Marcus and I really quickly and publicly define what that box of the game was. After each pitch, we'd basically just talk through, okay, we liked this part, we didn't like this part. And it created this very nitty-gritty of, okay, that humor you're talking about, it's sort of, it's kind of gross out humor. We're going more for satire, or, yeah, it doesn't make any sense that there's this green bus that travels through this post-apocalyptic world where you can get on and drive around and drink and shoot at enemies, but that's okay, that totally fits, that'll be great. And it was also a place for Marcus and I to publicly disagree about what the game was supposed to be. Sometimes, one of us would say, yeah, that totally fits, and then I'd say, no, I don't think it does. And we, instead of waiting and talking about it later, we'd actually have a conversation in front of the team, and we wouldn't get in fistfights or anything, but we'd have a debate sometimes about, like, that seems just over the edge to me, or no, that doesn't seem appropriate, and go through this. And these worked for us. When we were pitching the game, we were talking a lot about rock and roll, and less from a sense of music, which confused people for a while. People were, are we going to be carrying like a guitar and rhythm matching games to destroy mutants? But we were talking more about an attitude, and so we figured pitching these songs, getting people to listen to this kind of music, it would help people get into that sense of that feeling. And I think it's worth thinking about what in your project, it might not be rock songs, but thinking about sort of bringing people from a different perspective. I don't know what else you could do, but it'd be awesome to see do aromatherapy missions for Assassin's Creed or something, like what a Sandalwood Splinter Cell level would look like. And if there's one thing that really created the light bulb moment for the team, it was our respawn animations. I was working at home on Sunset Overdrive, writing docs, and I had on a TV show in the background that was sort of a survey of classic horror movies. And in really quick sequence, they had a thing where Dracula, comes out of the coffin, and then Frankenstein's getting electrified and waking up, and then the classic zombie coming up from out of the dead. And as soon as I think about the game, it's like, these are respawns. These are coming back from the dead. And I started thinking, I was like, this is kind of in single-player games, in our game, it's a free space. You die, and then there's a reload sometimes, or there's not, but then you spawn back in, and what happens in that period doesn't really change the mechanics of the gameplay. And it seemed like a cool little space in which we could fit a little vignette or something that created a tone for the game and sold the tone of the game. And so I went in the next day and talked to one of our animators, Steve Ryder, about this idea, pitched this idea of, what if when the player dies, we go and there's just all of a sudden there's a coffin there and there's flowers and candles around and the player bursts out and comes back to life that way. And in typical Steve fashion, he went really nuts with it. I'm going to play this video. It's got, within about a week, we had all of these rough respawns done and actually in the game, and then it's followed up with how a lot of these ended up in the ship game. And it really completely, these transformed how the team understood what we were aiming for. Months of Marcus and I saying, fun trumps realism. If it's fun and it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. We'll get it in there anyway. I don't think it was really registering. I think the song missions were doing doing a good job at getting people out of the typical headspace and taking baby steps for that. But these respawns really created a different shift, and I think it's because in just a few seconds, they did encapsulate what we wanted Sunset Overdrive to be about. We wanted them to be nonsensical and humorous and self-aware, referential of our real world and real pop culture, not just the internal world of Sunset Overdrive. And people came up and they were like, oh, when you guys say we can do anything in Sunset Overdrive, you mean we can do anything? And I'm not entirely sure what made them so successful. I think part of it's that encapsulated bit. But I also think it's a way that really quickly, it basically took an animator, a few days and a programmer probably a couple hours to actually get these in the game. And at that point, we were still so focused on just getting the core mechanics good, and we were in this ugly gray box world, and there was no tone to the game other than just trying to get something working. It was a really easy way that in this rough form, you still get it. You still get sold on the tone. And it was a great lesson to me of, wow, if you can even get just the smallest detail of feeling and tone in there, then every time people are playing these ugly prototypes of the game, every time they die, they still get that reminder of, oh yeah, eventually all this detail is going to get mashed and that tone's going to be there. So I think getting something early in, something easy and early can, even if it's an irrelevant detail like respawning, can make a big difference. So near the beginning of production, I read an article called Less Talk, More Rock by Super Brothers, and it dealt with a couple different things, but the thing that I got out of it is they were talking about Jordan Mechner's theory of game design, which is, usually people get inspiration and then they talk about what they're going to do for a really long time, and then after they've talked for a really long time, they rock, which they start actually making the game. And Jordan Mechner said, you should get inspired and then make it. And then once you've started making it, then you can start talking about it. And it allows you to build momentum off that initial inspiration. But it also, I think more importantly, it actually gives you something to talk about. I personally am not a big fan of theory crafting, particularly with action games, where it comes down to a visceral feel, and you can sit there and argue about it all the time. But once you get it in the game, it gives people something to actually have an opinion about. And so we'd consider ideas and discuss them briefly, but our default perspective was that any answer to a problem was the fastest way to find the right answer. And we took this really seriously. We pretty much dropped the idea of design docs or much documentation at all. Most of our design docs would be either 4 or 5 bullet points of this is what this should do, or just a conversation, or maybe a whiteboard drawing, and we take a picture and forward it around to the team. And you know, it allowed us to really speed up the iteration with which we worked. We had a style meter gauge in the game where the more you connected traversal and the more you killed things while you were traversing, the higher your style would go, and then it would unlock these different abilities. And we went through easily half a dozen iterations that had nothing to do with each other, like how you got this style and what happened when you triggered this style and whether or not you triggered it or it happened automatically. And it took us, I don't know, probably 6 weeks to 8 weeks to find even one that we kind of liked. And we still did dozens of smaller iterations on it, but not getting slowed down by that documentation, just having these really quick and easy conversations. None of those were documented, again, by more than just let's have a conversation or let's go to the whiteboard and draw a diagram of how this might work again. And it also gave us more space to allow the team to follow their own passions. If someone had an idea that we weren't certain about, we'd usually give them some time to pursue it anyway. It led to a lot of failures, which isn't surprising, but it also led to some really massive features and really, really huge changes in the game. I'll talk about the traversal in a little bit, but even things like the reintroduction of Insomniac's crazy weapons. I was determined to make an Insomniac game that people talked about anything other than crazy weapons. But we gave a guy he pitched the idea of the high fidelity, a gun that shoots vinyl records. And we were like, that is the worst idea ever. Like, A, we said no crazy weapons. B, when we said rock and roll, like, you're so on the nose, that's not what we're talking about at all. But he was really passionate about the idea. We gave him a day or two, and he got it in the game. And we went over and like, all right, we'll have crazy weapons in the game. And a lot of different fundamental features came as a result, again, of a lot of times just giving people a day or two out of their schedule to work on something that they were passionate about. And then I do want to mention something that didn't work for us is a few years ago I saw Stone LeBronde talk about visual design docs and using these kind of very graphic and pretty poster-like things instead of these written Word docs to convey at a high level what designs were, and just that they were attractive and people liked having them around and people actually looked at them. And I was like, this is great. We can we're talking about this attitude of rock and roll. We can make like rock flyers that explain at a high level what Sunset Overdrive is supposed to be about. And I think that they could work for DLC or a sequel, but when we didn't have any idea what we were doing. Updating a Word doc is hard enough, but when every other day we were changing how the character moved, trying to give people the time to go in and mess around with a bunch of Illustrator files and come up with a new poster, it just didn't work out. But it's something that I'd like to explore again on a game that's a little bit more settled. But that was unfortunately one of our failures. So game jams, this is sort of the ultimate form of our less talk, more rock. I'm sure everyone knows what a game jam is. I know a lot of companies use them. But we did a couple 2 to 3 day jams when we were still in pre-production where everyone could do whatever they wanted. Could be something on paper. It didn't actually even have to be in the game. They just had to show their work at the end of the period. And some of these were super hyper-focused and really technical. Some were really high concept. Some explored really small features or different game modes. And most of them, after the 2 or 3 days, didn't make a big impact on the game. But a few of them really did make some big detours and changes to the game. And one of the best examples is our world design. We had watched the Tekken Concrete anime, and we're like, yeah, we want to make this awesome, beautiful, crazy city that doesn't entirely make sense. But if you looked at the gray box world that we were building in, it basically looked like you were looking out of our office windows at the suburban Burbank, which is so boring. And one of our designers, Josue Benavides, took on the task of always something interesting. And he was inspired by both the movie Tekken Concrete and the sense of place that he got in games like Skyrim, where he felt like there's either always something in the distance that he could see that made him want to go there, or if he couldn't see something, if he saw a path, they had encouraged and then delivered on the promise of, if I go up that path, there will be something cool even if I can't see it right now. And so here's a section of what he built over over 2 or 3 days. This is while we were still on PC, so it's a little bit hitchy in the video, but it's a completely different kind of city than how we had before. It's one based on all this exaggeration. You can see it's multi-layered. It's not built on a grid. It's got all these crazy waterfalls that don't make really any sense but look cool. And it was great. The state of the architecture hadn't even really clicked in with me. I was so focused on, yeah, we're working on mechanics and not paying a lot of attention to the background. But it was bugging Josue, and he stepped up and made this little thing in a couple days. And as soon as the whole team saw it, we were like, all of us, we were like, yeah, that's what we need to be making. We live in Burbank. That's not where we want the fantasy of this game to be. And that was the first step towards getting to a city that looked more like this. And I think it was a great way to inspire the team. It was letting them have some free time in a single block to work on what inspired them. And I think, and I hope that they saw that if an idea resonated, we didn't waste any time at all in adopting it. And in this case, it meant completely rebuilding Sunset City, which we ended up actually doing 4 or 5 more times from scratch to find the right combination of verticality and this sense of feeling kind of grounded, but also a little bit of a fantasy land. And so those are some of the tools that we used to actually figure out what we wanted from the game, to communicate that to the team and try to get them inspired. But I want to talk a little bit about conviction and then talk about a few specific things that we did on the game and my role and my conviction of those things, some of which was sometimes right and sometimes wrong. And I said earlier, you really have to believe, obviously, in the core of the game. You have to be the person who believes in the process of the game. But the thing that I was not expecting to have difficulty with, but I did, was this idea of, yeah, I have to be the one who's championing, like, this is the way we're doing it. We're in good shape and we're going in this direction. But then at some point, having to make really hard left turns or right turns and not feel like people thought that I was crazy or I didn't know what I was doing. Especially when I'd been fighting with someone for a couple weeks and they were really sure that their way was right and I was really sure that my way was right. And I was like, we're doing it my way. And then at some point I'd be like, oh, yeah, you were right. We're doing it your way. And I think the thing that helped diffuse those arguments a lot went back to the less talk, more rock. Whenever we had a disagreement, I would choose how to proceed, and it wasn't always my way. If I was not sure, or I was kind of like, I think this is the right way, but you seem really confident that this is the right way, or that person had more experience with a particular aspect of designing games, then we would try their way. But we'd say, let's get in the game, let's build it. If either one of us doesn't like it, we can just come back and revisit it. And I think it kept the engine moving. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. It gave them agency, so that if we did put something in and they didn't like it, they had an open door. Am I really that close? Whoa, you freaked me out. Okay, they just gave me the 5-minute warning. I've still got almost 30 minutes. Okay. Whew. I didn't think I was that off. Sorry, I lost my place here a little bit. And the other thing is, honestly, most of the time, whenever people are disagreeing and having conversations, if you get something playable, you tend to build consensus really quickly. If a bad idea goes in, there's usually not a lot of disagreement about whether or not it's a bad idea. And a lot of first ideas are bad ideas. The difficult thing is when you both agree, okay, this is a good idea, but my idea is a great idea, and so we should go to that. But even, again, with the less talk, more rock, a lot of times we had the time to then sort of take a couple steps towards that other idea and figure out, okay, is that a direction we do want to head or not? And so I want to go through a couple specific instances that from Sunset Overdrive. This encapsulates really everything I'm talking, but specifically about my conviction about these things and probably how wrong I am about most of them. So when we first started creating the game, I think the game design had not really caught up to that tonal shift from moving from the I Am Legend Sunset Overdrive or this Guerrillas Sunset Overdrive. We moved to this more stylized and subversive tone, but we'd been talking about this game for a couple of years before we actually started making it, and I think I had started getting enamored of certain design choices. I just like fitted these different puzzles together. Like this is going to be a great mechanic, and maybe it would have, but I don't know that it was fitting what we were trying to make anymore. And tonally, we kept talking about being about speed and action and aggressiveness, but mechanically, we were what I call skinny guy Gears of War. It was about hiding and taking cover, but instead of being like a linebacker, it would basically star me. And so I could move a little bit quicker, but it was a very different sense of a game than having this aggressiveness. And almost right away, people started bringing up skateboarding, which Marcus and I shut down right away. We thought it had too much baggage, both culturally and other games having been made. We're like, Tony Hawk's an awesome game. We're going to make this giant game with a shitty version of Tony Hawk in it, and everyone's going to come and say, yeah, this is a game that has a shitty version of Tony Hawk in it. And even then, people wouldn't drop it. I'm going to click forward and start a movie. It starts with Josue Benavides, the guy who did The City earlier. And the next game jam, he made skateboarding without a skateboard. He called it, I think, street surfing. I think he was hoping that we wouldn't notice that if there was no actual physical skateboard, that it was skateboarding. And then it progresses from there through a bunch of the different prototypes that we made while we were figuring out what traversal was going to be in the game. And again, this came out, and we were like, no way. We are definitely not doing this. But we did want to have these little situational moves. So you're running, and maybe you could jump on an oil slick and slide a little bit quickly to if people were chasing you or something like that. And so the designer who was working on those, Cameron Christian, he was working on these little small moves, but he wanted to make those more expansive and really make the player a lot more agile. And he was really passionate about this. And we kept saying, we're not feeling this. This is not what Sunset Overdrive is about. But if you guys, while you're making these little moves, if you guys want to spend a day or two messing around with some of your things, we can put them in and we'll look at them and yeah, you got that time. And so they worked on it, and then we looked at it and like, yep, this isn't working. This isn't where we want to go. But as long as it's here, this is what we don't like about what you have here. So why don't you take a day or two and fix that? And we just kept on going like that for quite a while, like giving them a couple days a week for probably a couple of months. And it became more and more about we were improving what was there, but we kept caveating every time they would bring it back, like, we're going to let you guys keep working on this, but you know that eventually we're going to say this is not the game, and all this work can be thrown away. But if you guys feel passionate about it, keep working on it. And then one day I woke up and said to myself, you keep saying that aggressiveness and velocity are what this game is centered on, but that's not what it feels like at all. And so I came in that day and I was like, all right, traversal is what this game is all about. We're totally going in that direction now, but we're definitely not going to traverse and shoot at the same time. And I'll spare you the details, but a few months later, we were traversing and shooting. And that really became the absolute mechanical center of Sunset Overdrive. And then we spent the next few years fighting for traversal and combat. And it was a lot of work. We were doing, trying all these different moves. We were doing a ton of usability tests to see if people understood what they were wanting to do, if they could deal with the controls. We were having to rebuild our entire city again to enable this traversal. I'm just going to start this over because otherwise you're going to look at a black screen for 30 seconds. And we were having to rebuild our camera and the way our shooting model worked in order to work with this traversal system. And it was still very much a mess at the point that we hit when we had to say, all right, we are either going to do this or we're going to go back to kind of the original idea. And it was kind of a scary time because it wasn't fun and it wasn't very cool, but we thought this is different. We said we wanted to do something different with the game. We have some time to make it better, and everything sucks at first. And if we could do it, it would be really cool. And so at the point where we were like, all right, we do have to rebuild all these things to make them work. It was definitely not clear that that was the right direction. And there were a lot of people, both at Insomniac, not all, but a lot of people at Insomniac and Microsoft who were not into this idea. And some were, but more than a few people came up to me and said, you are taking whatever chance this game has to be good and ruining it by making this decision. But I think this is a perfect case of how development is supposed to work. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm not the best designer at Insomniac. I think my job is basically to get the best designers to do their best work, and then I'm fortunate enough that I get to come in and cherry pick the best of that best. And figure out how those things fit together. And we give just enough rope to this guy that we worked with, we trust, we respect, that he was able to get something working. And we still didn't really like it at first. We didn't hate it either, and we gave him a little bit more time. And eventually we did see the potential of it. And I think that it was a great lesson for me of if you give people with good instincts that you trust some free space to experiment, it really can have this. I can't overstate the massive impact that these experiments that Cam and Ross and Steve did on the game. It would be a much more boring and probably not very cool game if we hadn't done that. So next thing I want to talk about is our character customization system, what we call our Vanity system. And this is something that Marcus and I locked in on immediately. And this was the thing. This was one of the things that we never, ever wavered on. And one of our first decisions was we want people to be able to express themselves in the game some way. And clothing seems like a very obvious way. It's something that, if you're playing in multiplayer or cooperative, it's the thing that you always carry around with you. And we had this central theme in Sunset that we described as be who you want to be. And it was a manifestation of something that I had read in a Stephen Pressfield book, Turning Pro. If you guys haven't ever read, this is actually the sequel to a book called The War of Art. Stephen Pressfield's the guy who wrote the Legend of Bagger Vance. But these two books are about how difficult it is to be a creative person and how to be a better creative person. But it had this part that it was, well, I'll read it to you and you will understand what it says. So this is from Turning Pro. The tribe doesn't give a shit. The amateur dreads becoming who she really is because she fears that this new person will be judged by others as different. The tribe will declare us weird or queer or crazy. The tribe will reject us. Here's the truth. The tribe doesn't give a shit. There is no tribe. That gang or posse that we imagine to sustain us by the bonds we share is in fact a conglomeration of individuals who are just as fucked up as we are and just as terrified. Each individual is so caught up in his own bullshit that he doesn't have 2 seconds to worry about yours or mine or to reject or diminish us because of it. When we truly understand that the tribe doesn't give a damn, we're free. There is no tribe, and there never was. Our lives are entirely up to us. I think it's a little bit easier said than done, and I would say that anyone who's ever been on the internet would say that there actually are plenty of people who are not caught up in their own bullshit, that they have plenty of time to reject and diminish all of ours. But it was a good statement, and the spirit of that was something that we wanted to get into Sunset Overdrive. I'd also been obsessively watching this Bill Cunningham, New York. It's a documentary about Bill Cunningham, the New York Times street photographer. And Marcus and I were talking about how strictly society judges appearance. And I think a lot of people think of fashion as sort of silly. It's just your appearance. What difference does an outfit change make? And yet I think the barrier to getting probably an average dude in America to get in a fist fight or maybe start a war is probably much lower than getting an average guy in America to go out in public with a skirt on. And by the way, I love that I'm saying this on the Wear a Kilt Day. I didn't know it was Wear a Kilt Day, and I was walking around this morning early, and I saw 3 guys in kilts in the hall, and I twittered. I was like this must be, is it Wear a Kilt Day? And it turns out it actually is. So guys with skirts. And it's fascinating to us that an article of clothing can have so much power. And in the movie, Mr. Cunningham says, the wider world perceives fashion sometimes as a frivolity that should be done away with in the face of social upheavals and problems that are enormous. The point is, in fact, that it's the armor to survive the reality of everyday life. And so we said we're going to have all this crazy stuff for people to wear. We're going to allow and hopefully encourage people to, at least in the game and in the safety of the game, let their inner freak flag fly. We're going to have different body sizes, different genders, different races. We're not going to designate any clothing or hairstyles or makeup as male or female. Everything is wearable by anyone. The last production question that we had was Gavin Gould, our lead character artist, came to me and said, so we can either do 20 beards that work on guys, or we can do 10 beards that work on everyone. I was like, how can you even ask this question? We're right at the finish line. But the most controversial decision that Marcus and I made with the fashion was that we said there's absolutely no stats associated with it. We didn't want people to feel like I have to wear the Robin Hood hat because it gives me +2 agility. And I can't tell you how many meetings we had where sometimes it was really the whole design team and they're arguing with me. People are not going to care about this stuff if there aren't stats attached to it. And eventually it switched from arguing to begging, please let us put stats on this stuff. We need it from a mechanical standpoint. We need this to create meaningful progression. But to us, it wasn't about mechanics. It was about this theme and this idea and this point of view of wanting people to feel a certain sense of freedom in the game. And in their defense, it was a long time before it became even a little bit clear that this was going to work. It wasn't until, I would say by E3 of last year, probably 2.5 months before we went gold, we probably had at that point we had maybe 15% of the options in the game at that point. It was also the first time we really showed the game publicly, but all of a sudden people at E3 were like, oh, this is really cool. I can dress in these different ways, and I can do these different things and present myself in these different ways. And even though people were like, yeah, then maybe this is going to work, it really wasn't apparent until the game shipped that people were going to be into it. It wasn't something that was easy to play test. All this stuff was coming on at the last second. A lot of these clothing things are things that you have to earn over time. And it was something that was very difficult to measure as we were making the game. But the number of people after the game came out who were complaining that the Xbox didn't have a screenshot tool, or were taking pictures of their TV with their phone, or capturing videos and then taking screenshots off that. And it was really cool to see the diversity of how people dress. Some people came out looking like they just walked straight out of Banana Republic or J. Crew, and some people looked like they just walked out of Burning Man. And that was one of the debates particularly with Microsoft was, how much J. Crew are you talking, and how much Burning Man are you talking? They were really concerned that we have enough plain white tees in the game. But one of the nicest things, and one of the things that we were hoping would happen, was a post on NeoGAF. And a woman wrote, I wanted to play as a guy because I usually love to dress them more than women. But since I'm a girl and the body proportions are true to mine, I definitely was making a girl. Plus they have my afro that I actually have. It felt like an enlightening experience. Insomniac so far is the only developers who have blessed me with my actual hairstyle. I cried, lol. And that's really cool. I think that's awesome. And I certainly wouldn't ever want people, I don't want to feel like I want to feel in this game because I'm going to shoot a little bit more accurately, or my foot speed's going to be a little bit quicker. And I think that Mr. Cunningham talks about fashion being the armor to survive everyday life, but I like to think that it can be a little bit of a weapon against conformity and tradition, and that it can provide in a safe space a place to experiment and for more guys to wear skirts. And then the last feature I want to talk about is our night defense missions. You remember at the beginning of the talk I was talking about this I Am Legend idea of you'd go out and scavenge during the day, and then the big action part of the game would be at night when all these enemies, these hordes of enemies come running in. And that initial idea of this is the high action point of the game, this is this really part of the game, I think got a little bit ossified in my mind. It was the first thing that we started prototyping because it was very action-oriented. It was the first thing that was fun in the game because it was action-oriented. And we were spending a lot of time. We were working on AI built around this. We were working on defense-related mechanics and trap systems and individual traps and defense-related economies and UI and training, all of this stuff built around the night defense. And it was also a way that we had something fun. It was just something to show to the team. See, we can do something right. But the feedback that we started getting from playtests once we had more of the game put together was really, really odd and confusing. The fun scores for the night defense were the highest in the game. Like, you know, you read and night defense, night defense, night defense. And they would go down a little bit in successive defenses, but they were still, even the low night defenses, were still higher than the rest of the game at that point. But at the same time, the narrative comments started to get kind of negative after the second or third night defenses. This is getting repetitive. I'm not really liking this. And I didn't know what to do with that. It was, you know, they were saying, I'm not really liking this. But they're also saying, based on the numbers, but I'm still liking this better than anything else you guys are doing in the game. And we kept working on it, and the playtest, the results kept coming back the same. And rather than doing what I should have done, which is step back and looked at it more at the game as a whole, we did the opposite, where we started looking at each individual night defense and saying, okay, well, why are people not liking this night defense? Despite the fact they're saying that they're having fun, they're saying they're getting tired of it. So how do we make them not tired of it? And then we got we had a mock review done for the game. It was I think, we got the game running start to finish in order to get this mock review done. It was the first time that you could play from start to end of the game. There were definitely still a couple places you had to squint. But this guy just loathed the night defenses. I mean, he hated them. And it was, again, it harkened back to this, like, why? People keep saying this is fun, but they don't like it. And I said, okay, well, I obviously need to go and figure out what this guy experienced. So I blocked out a few days. I went and locked myself in a conference room. I was like, I'm going to play through the game start to finish and get the experience that this guy did. And after about the second or third night defense, I was ready to kill somebody. And unfortunately, the only real person I had to kill myself was myself. I was like, Jesus, there are a lot of these. And this was really late in production. This is probably early July, mid-July, when we were going gold at the end of August. And it didn't leave a lot of options. And we did some serious triage. That day, we went from having 8 of these in the game to 5. They went from 7 to 8 minutes in length to 3 to 4 minutes in length. We added midnight checkpoints. That's not midnight. But you know, you can probably imagine that when they were 8-minute segments, and if you failed, we actually sent you all the way back, and it was really frustrating. All these decisions that when you're playing just that little part of the game, it's like, oh yeah, I played 5 minutes and I failed, and I'll just play it again. But whenever in the context of playing the whole game and I want to get to the next thing, it was really, really frustrating. I'm still kind of torn on them because I still like playing them. I think that they are sort of the great high action part of the game. And it's sort of like my first love of Sunset Overdrive. But I think that was a place where my conviction got really misguided. And I kept thinking about them as representing something from this original idea of the game and not realizing that the game had gone from this sort of systematic, we're going to go back and forth between day and night, but to much more, every mission that you're doing in Sunset Overdrive has something special about it. Maybe you're defending a boat and we're introducing a new enemy and there's a new weapon, or the leader of the scouts has drunk overcharge and transforms into this dragon boss that you're battling. And that after all that switch, this ended up being sort of, despite being very high action, ended up being the repetitive part, and I think to a lot of people one of the more boring parts by the end of the game. So this is a video of how Sunset Overdrive ended up, and Marcus and I wanted Sunset Overdrive to have a point of view and feel different from the sea of gray and AAA games out there. We had never made an open world game. We had never made there were a lot of things about this game that were different for Insomniac, and it was, I think that was great in encouraging us to try a lot of different processes really quickly, see what worked, see what didn't work. And it's worth noting, it's like the worst end to the video. I'll play it one more time while I finish talking. There were tools that we used that worked at certain points of the project and not others. The less talk, more rock works great when you have 20 people. When you have 120 people, some of whom are in Burbank, some of whom are in our offices in North Carolina, and a bunch of people up at Microsoft working on it, it starts not working so much. And we would still use it for particular aspects of the game, honing in on them, but adjusting on that. I just think it's helpful to think about what processes are going to work best for you or your team. Are you really methodical or a little bit more fly by the seat of your pants? Does your team like certainty or do they like experimentation? Are the demographics of your team tight enough that you can just sort of assume that people understand what you're talking about, or do you need to do something like movie nights to create this vernacular that everyone speaks? And do you trust your team enough sometimes to just let them run amok and see where they go? And I think things work best whenever we were having fun making the game. And the game, I'm really proud of it. I'm really happy with it. It was the first game I ever made that when it came out, like publicly, I actually took the week off and I went home and I sat down and I played it start to finish, despite having played it many, many times before. And I think my biggest lesson, though, was that as someone who's pathologically neurotic and loves to control everything, it became really clear to me that the more I let the reins go on the team, the better things went. We definitely had a bumpy ride at the beginning trying to figure out where to tell people to go. But as we started including people and having them help us decide where that was, both by asking us questions and getting involved in the process, but also the kinds of things that they were bringing up, or even mechanically, things like the traversal system. At some point, it became really, I think Marcus and I had the easiest job in the building, because it was just like, we were like, that's where we're going. And everyone walked there on their own power. And we were there to occasionally nudge people, or we'd say, the target has shifted a little bit. But I think the best decision that we made with Sunset Overdrive was that there wasn't a huge sense of logic, and there weren't a lot of limits on what people could do. And I think Insomniac is a really talented team. We're a little bit quirky team. I sometimes call us the island of misfit toys of the games industry. But it really allowed, I think, the team members to let their own freak flags fly and put thousands of unique bits of themselves in it, which ultimately is what I think made Sunset Overdrive really successful. That's my talk. And I think we have like 5 minutes for questions. Yeah.
No. Yes? Okay. So hi, great presentation, by the way. It was very interesting. I have 2 questions for you. First one being, at which point in the production process did you actually need it? Did you feel that you had the experience that you were looking to get? So that's question number 1. And question number 2, after this point has been reached, what was the flexibility that you guys allowed yourself to have to change stuff? Maybe late in the production process?
I think, so the first question was, when did we have sort of the player experience that we felt was what the game was going to be? Probably like 2 years into the 3-year cycle. It was pretty late. We were building parts of the game, and there were a lot of things that ended up still working. We were building enemies and weapons that no matter what we ended up doing with traversal and things like that those things still work. We might have to modify them a little bit, but it was pretty far in before I think we really felt, before the game felt the way it was going to feel. I think probably around 1.5 years in, we were like, that's the direction that we're going to go. We had at the time, we had an E3 coming up for our announce, and so it was like, okay, are we going to be hiding behind cover in the E3 trailer, or are you going to be, running around on telephone wires? And at that point, that was the kind of, we don't have time to go back. As far as the flexibility, we actually had a lot of flexibility, because once we figured out what we were doing, it's actually really easy to make all the stuff. The city got built up and torn down. Missions were getting, every time we do a mission, it got quicker and quicker. And just, like any game, as things work, making things with those things that work gets easier and easier. So I think we maintained a lot of flexibility, and we were making still some pretty significant changes up to the last minute to try to make the game as close to what we wanted as possible.
in the period where you're game jamming and you're throwing in lots of things and the team is kind of going in disparate directions, your code base and your asset base can get kind of like muddled and crazy. How did you contain that? Did you build in extra time to refactor and get it back to stable? Or what did you do in that situation?
I have no idea. Yeah, I'm the least technical person. I'm actually lucky that they let me out of the office with a laptop. I don't know, and I know that it tended to be the programmers who would go in and get into the code, and there were only 3 or 4 of them on the team at the time. Most of the people would, if people were trying to do something that was code related, they would have to team up with the programmer. The designers were using, a lot of times just hacking together things with scripts that were easy to tear back out. And I'll say at that point, we were still working in a lot of just like literally gray boxes and that kind of thing. So there wasn't a lot that we felt was like at the base of what the game. We had like hero movement and some really basic AI, but I don't think there was a whole lot to get messed up at least the point of like our first jam. Anything else? Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming to check it out.